But I'll start with three people whose job it has been to work for a president and deal with him every day of the week, as well as deal with the relationship between the president and the working press. Joe Lockhart, who was President Bill Clinton's press secretary in the second term. Nicolle Wallace, the communications chief for President George W. Bush. And Ari Fleischer, President George W. Bush's very first press secretary. I sat down with them and asked them about the art of working with the president and what they think we can expect from a President Trump. All right, let's dive right in. Nicolle Wallace, Ari Fleischer, Joe Lockhart. So all of you have had to move from a campaign to the White House. How hard is it to transition from being a campaign sort of advocate to suddenly the spokesperson for the United States of America?
It's a very different reflex. And there's three phases to it, frankly. When you're in the primary, you're talking to your party's voters. When you're in the general election, you're talking to the nation's voters. When you're at the White House, you're talking to the world. Mm-hmm. And it's a very different need for how to communicate, what to say, how to be nonpartisan at appropriate times. And finally, you have to know a lot of policy, because the job is spin, it is politics, but there's a lot of policy, and you better learn it fast.
I guess I would say is that how hard is it to kick the partisan thing at the beginning of this? When you go in, when you transition, how hard is that?
Well, I mean, we worked for someone whose top priority after winning election was really bringing the country together. The first time he ran as a uniter, and he came into office after the recount, which was excruciating for the country, and he was acutely aware of that. So he didn't have an urge to continue campaigning after he'd won, and re-election was even more so. We were a country engaged in two wars with uneven trajectories at the time of his second inauguration. So there was no resistance on his part to sort of refocusing the country's attention on governing.
I think it's an exercise in, as a candidate, you're responsible for nothing. All problems are made by someone else. All solutions are magically doable, and you can implement.
Because you just say it.
Yeah, because you just say it,
right.
And all candidates know that. And then the transition period, I think, is sort of delaying taking responsibility. Everybody comes in and their first instinct is every problem was the last guy's fault. Mm-hmm. But what you wake up one day, and sometimes it's in January, sometimes it's in February, sometimes it's later, and you realize nobody's blaming the last guy anymore. And then it gets to the policy, and it gets to the fact that this is much more important. The stakes are higher. The words you use, the way you say it, where the comma is matters around the world, and it's a much more difficult job.
And you'll appreciate this, but my boss's advice to me, President Bush instructed me, never look backwards. No matter what happened before us, it doesn't matter. It's up to us to lead. So no blaming, no looking back. And it's an instinct you have in the campain. Blame everything on the other guy. Yeah. So now it doesn't matter because it's up to you to deliver.
So you got different advice than I got. I walked in, no, not on that front, but I walked into the Oval Office between the re-elect and becoming White House Communications Director, and he said, "Are you ready for the big league? This is the stuff that really matters." Yeah. I think presidents realize that what you said, that what happens in a campaign is, when it's over, poof, it vanishes. But what happens when you're president is permanent.
Yeah. This is a unique challenge for the Trump communications team in this White House, because there is already an antagonistic, or a feel that there's an antagonistic relationship between the press corps and the incoming president, because the incoming president wants to have this.
I think that there's always antagonism, and there's always, particularly with the president, there's no president who ever woke up in the morning and called their press secretary and said, "You're doing a great job. I love the way I'm being covered. Everything's fair, and even the criticism is helping me grow as a president." Never happened. Never happened. Never happened.
I'm shocked.
But I think there's real differences this time too. We're on opposite sides of the parties, but I think our transitions were really similar because we shared a couple of things. We shared the idea that the press-president relationship was mutually beneficial. The reason that people sit down in that briefing room every day is because both sides get something out of it. I don't think that's the case coming in here. So I think that will run. The second is, while we might use extreme spin in some cases, traditionally for the last 50 years, we've operated on the same basic fact set. Mm-hmm. So, Ari and Nicolle will look at the facts, I'll look at them, and we'll have a great argument about who is right and who's wrong. we're really in a place where, and we haven't seen this, I think, since the 60s with Nixon, where they create their own facts. It's, somewhat Orwellian, which is you redefine the past, which means you can define the present and the future. And that's going to be very difficult for both sides to come to grips with.
I think there's a different trend going on, and it's two parts to it. The first is there's a double-barreled hostility. This press corps can't stand Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is happy to return the favor. And he uses it to his advantage. He can use it to his advantage because, as the Gallup poll recently indicated, confidence in the press to report the news accurately and fairly has never been lower. And so the press has made itself vulnerable because they've lost the trust of their readers and their viewers.
Is this on the
and
press?
Trump has widely taken advantage of it. Absolutely,
no,
a big part is on the press.
No, I understand that, but why isn't there any responsibility on the partisans?
I didn't say there wasn't.
Right. I feel like partisans
I pointed
have
out
done
accurately
more,
about
right.
a Gallup poll, which is an
No doubt.
issue the media still has to grapple with.
Should it matter to the partisan actors, Democratic and Republican actors in here, that they have helped delegitimize them?
Listen, I think we're staring at trees and missing the forest. We have just elected a man who bullies female reporters at his rally as an applause line. We have just elected a man who started a hot war with a female anchor instead of attending a debate she moderated. We are in a new place, and I don't think it's good, and I don't think it has any parallels to the past. No. And I don't think Trump needs the press, but I think he wants them like an addict craves their drug.
And the press corps is also one of the least reluctant or most reluctant institutions to change. While technology's changed, everything's changing. The White House press corps especially is still largely dominated and defined by the habits of people's view in the 90s, and it hasn't changed much.
Well, let's talk about this. Let's make some changes here. You guys could make changes. I've got my own ideas, and I'm not going to. I'll wait till you guys. But what are some changes in the relationship between the White House press corps and some traditions that you think deserve? There's been some talk of upending some of them. What ones would you like to make? I'll start with you, Nicolle.
Well, I mean, I'm most intrigued by the notion that Trump doesn't think he needs or wants to have a protective pool. The protective pool exists so that on days like 9/11, a president can speak not just to his press or to this country, but to the world. So I think changing his mind about the need for a protective pool and then maybe getting the press to be a little more inventive and modern in what that protective pool is made up of would be one of them.
I'd make a suggestion for the press. You don't need to follow the president around, and not on the protective way. You don't need to put every word he says on TV and have a story every day about what he said yesterday. It's easy to find that. All you have to do is put on Twitter or Facebook Live. It is all there. If more resources were put into not just what was said today, but what's actually really happening, I think it'd be much better service to the public.
I'd make two changes. One is I take the briefing off of live TV, embargo it, make it a much more serious briefing rather than a TV show where both sides are posturing. And the second is I would democratize the room. There are 750 reporters credentialed to cover the White House with 49 assigned seats. Change the room makeup. On Mondays, let it be the traditional White House press corps. On Tuesday, let it be business journalists. On Wednesday, let it be foreign journalists. Thursday, I'd love to put Report and Think Progress next to each other in the briefing room and let them ask questions and have that totally be social media day. And then on Friday, you could go back to the White House press corps if you wanted, move the room around, and then you'll get a lot less gotcha and a lot more substantive questions.
How about no televised briefing? And I say this, I was the unpopular guy among my TV colleagues. I believe the televised briefing destroyed the White House briefing.
So does Mike McCurry.
Right.
I mean,
really
so does
believe
Mike. Mike has said his
So does everybody who's involved. But the
I
reality,
missed the gaggle. You get more information out of you, Ari, at the gaggle. You would speak.
But that's what you should do back in the briefing.
And you, Nicolle, and you, Joe.
That's why I would take the briefing off of live TV. I would keep it so they can use clips and put it on the news. And also, after September 11th, this country needed to hear the live messages from the White House. So that there is a room and a time and a space.
But can I just stop this? Does anyone think that the press secretary is going to be standing in the room and Trump will be sitting in the Oval, like tweeting something that might make bigger news or totally contradict?
Or
I mean,
probably
I think that the whole
critiquing his press
the whole
secretary.
convention
he hasn't
of
done that now.
conventional. I mean, I don't even know that this conversation will hold up 60 days into the Trump presidency, because the idea that he's going to be able to tolerate watching someone at a podium delivering news that he thinks he can do better from his whatever he tweets from is an assumption I'm not comfortable making.
Well, by the way, that's something you guys all, I think, never have had to experience, which is a principle that will go off the reservation a lot and not tell you the people in charge of sort of
It's
spinning.
his reservation. He's,
Yeah.
he's never off.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Then the staff has to catch up.
What the staff thinks is the reservation, right? The guardrails that they were trying to put up.
I think the difference is, probably the most important part of having the job is staying close to the president, so you know what he's thinking, you know what he's doing.
Or at least following him on Twitter.
But in this case, the president, this president doesn't like to share his views with his inner circle, try it there and maybe go out. But he wants to share it with the world first. Everything's a trial balloon. Nothing is real. There's nothing that he tweets that's written in stone, because everything he does is to get a reaction and to judge. Well, then, if I don't, people didn't like that, I won't do that. That's not operative anymore. And it does go back to, I think, the Nixon days, where poor Ron Ziegler had to go out on a regular basis. You guys are too young, but had to go out, and someone would say, well, you told us yesterday this and that. And he said, well, yesterday's news is not operative.
But the real communicator here is Donald Trump.
Yep.
We're
Yep.
talking staff.
Yeah.
We still have to see how Donald Trump handles the huge power he will now have as the president, commander-in-chief, and communicator.
There is one other job you guys have that people don't realize unless you're a member of the White House press corps and go overseas. And that is, when you go overseas, we're all on the same team. And there is this fights that take place overseas when it comes to press access, more in the small d democratic way. And every press secretary has fought for this in different ways. This is something that, I'll be honest, some White House press corps are concerned. Is that going to be there with this team? Are they going to be the protectors of the American press freedom in China?
I remember fighting with some members of our press corps sometimes, and I said, when they'd get their backup, I said, listen, don't yell at me, because when I walk back through that door, I am the only person that gives a hoot, whether you get what you want before 5 p.m. today.
I think there's a phrase that all presidents eventually get when they look at their spokesman or communicators, and it's your friends in the press, like you own them, and it's
I heard this.
you have. It's
Presidents playing you as if you work for us, they think, right?
But you sort of do. The press secretary
there is a
does.
bigger thing here, which is you do have to fight for access, and it does. But and not to get too serious here, what we do here does have an impact around the world.
Right.
We do believe in democracy. We do believe in a free press. And when we undermine it, the rest of the world is watching. So when we go to Russia, which is always a fight, China, always a fight on access things, it sends a message to the people there that a president of the United States will say, I'm not going into that meeting unless my press corps can come. But when we're doing that here, that's a problem.
One of the little-known parts of the job is your desk literally sits equidistant between the front door of the Oval Office and the podium in the briefing room on the other side of you. And the press secretary is paid to represent the president, but you also have to work with and represent the press corps. And it's a terrible balancing act.
Yeah, and I think it's harder and harder for these guys.
It gets harder for these guys because he's made so many of them, our own correspondents, personal targets. And I think that one of the things I'm most hopeful will stop is the targeting by name of individual journalists in that room. Because people don't understand this.
It's the one thing I asked of him.
People don't understand.
Hit the organization, not the person.
Right. And the people that cover him will wake up every day and go to work at the White House. That's their place of business. That's where their desks are under the briefing room. People don't realize that. They don't work in some faraway bureau.
That's right.
They go to work at the White House.
The real downside for the president is he helped his election bid by undermining the press and having people trust the press less. He's going to find a time where he needs the press to send this message both here and around the world, and that's the real trick. And that's a transition he's going to have to make.
Give him credit. He goes around the press and he goes through the press. Since Election Day, he's done interviews with the Today Show, with 60 Minutes, with the New York Times, with the Wall Street Journal, with Time Magazine. So he does a lot of both.
And in every one of those interviews, the important message was, people out there, trust me, don't trust what you read or you see. And the problem is that there's going to be a point at which, in a time of crisis, that he does need a free and strong press to get his message out. I believe. That could be old-fashioned.
You guys delivered. This was a fascinating discussion, and I will get yelled at by all my television colleagues for wanting to get rid of the televised briefing. But hey, there you go. Anyway, Nicolle Wallace, Ari Fleischer, Joe Lockhart. A lot of fun here, turning the tables. Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.